Alright everybody, you're watching the UFC 244 Diaz vs. Masvidal recap video. So, getting right into it, we'll start the prelims. We had Jairzinho Rozenstruik knocking out Andrei Arvlovski in just 29 seconds.
Yep. There's not that much to say about that because that's what happened. 29 seconds into the fight. I was cooking food, standing in the kitchen. I looked over, was like, oh, Arlovski's going to fight? Watch this, Julio. He's going to get knocked out in the first round. 29 seconds in. I think it was 11 total strikes thrown the whole fight. Arlovski threw 3. Rozenstruik threw 8. Caught him, put him out with 1 shot. End of story. Arlovski's a super seasoned veteran, former UFC champ, but this is kind of what's been happening lately. He takes a real bad loss, then he'll come back and win a couple fights and look pretty good against some of the lower guys or whatever. But then he faces another young up and comer like Rozenstruik, who has just dynamite in his fists and nasty loss. So who knows?
A bad loss for the veteran. And moving on, we had Corey Anderson knocking out Johnny Walker in 2 minutes and 7 seconds. So that one took a little more time, but still a similar result.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting because it was Johnny Walker coming into this fight was the guy that a lot of people were hyping up in the light heavyweight division as being the next challenger for John Jones. He's kind of unorthodox, throws a lot of weird strikes, has knockout power from both at range and up close. He has weird knockouts in the clinch with elbows. He has punch knockouts, everything. He's crazy. He likes to showboat a bit, and he has a shoulder injury that had kept him out of the cage for a while from a celebration. He kind of fell straight backwards and did the worm one time in the ring after his last win and injured his shoulder to the point where he needed surgery. And it looked like in the middle of the fight, while he was doing some craziness and kind of taunting Corey Anderson, you see him kind of shake out his elbow at one point, or his shoulder at one point, and everybody's like, oh, Jesus, he screwed that shoulder up again just by goofing off, and it didn't really matter in the end because Corey Anderson put him out of there in the first round, which is good for Corey Anderson because he's had some impressive wins, but they've all been decisions and kind of boring fights. So for him to get a knockout over a high-profile guy like Johnny Walker, who's kind of, was expected to be the next big thing in the division, is great for his career. The way he acted afterwards is not. He was ranked like 10, and Walker was ranked 11, and he knocked Walker out, and then he got on the mic and said, give me a title shot or let me go. Like basically saying, I deserve a title shot after knocking out Johnny Walker. But he knocked number 11, Fight a top 5 guy, then get your title shot. This puts you in line for that next number 1 contender fight for sure. So from here, they should put him in whatever contender fight they want to. Maybe, the winner of one of the fights coming up this weekend or whatever. But, not a good look for Corey Anderson at the moment.
And that's not really how it works, right? You don't just demand title shots and get them.
Some people do, some people don't. The bigger name guys can talk some shit and kind of make demands, and sometimes it comes to fruition, but typically not, yeah.
Moving on to the main card, we had Kevin Lee knocking out Gregor Gillespie in 2 minutes and 47 seconds. The first career loss for Gillespie. So, what happened in that one? Besides the obvious result, like what led up to it?
Kevin Lee's game plan was great. I said that coming into this fight, the big question I had was his game plan and his coaching and his camp. He's now training out of TriStar Gym in Canada with Faraz Sahabi and George St. Pierre, and they're some of the best minds and one of the best fighters in the game. And I was wondering what his game plan was going to be. His striking was just better. His takedown defense was good, was on point, and Gillespie was landing some good jabs and stuff, but Kevin Lee just was able to set up a combination and landed a giant head kick. Brutal. Like, that dude was out cold immediately. Bad first loss, but against a guy with as big a name as Kevin Lee, Gregor Gillespie will be back. He's the best wrestler in the division. He'll be back. He'll come back better. But it was a good win for Kevin Lee, a good way for him to stay relevant in the division and stay towards the top. Beating one of the guys who has a bit of hype behind him coming up in the division. So and it was him coming back down to lightweight from his little foray at welterweight. So it's kind of nice to see him find, hopefully, the weight class in camp that he will call home for the time being.
The next fight in the card was an interesting one. We had Derrick the Black Beast Lewis matched up against Blagoy Ivanov, and this is one that actually went to decision, which I wouldn't have thought with the fighters we have on the card. But how did this one play out? How did it end up going to a decision?
I did not expect this fight to go to a decision either, but Ivanov was just tough as hell, and he got some takedowns and went for some submissions, but Derrick Lewis just proved to be too much for him, man. Black Beast he's brutal. He's just a giant dude. He's super strong. He lands giant shots. It's hard to keep him down because he's so big and so strong. He just kind of like weirdly muscled his way out of disadvantaged positions on the ground, and Ivanov couldn't really get the finish. And so the Black Beast just kind of cruised to a decision. It was less exciting than I had expected it to be, but it's a good win for Derrick Lewis, and keeps him towards the top of the division. We'll probably see him fight another big name next. Personally, I'm hoping I would hear this coming weekend's fight, Greg Hardy versus Alexander Volkov. I would love to see Volkov win and just beat Greg Hardy, but the prospect of Greg Hardy fighting Derrick Lewis is just so exciting. So who knows? But great to see Derrick Lewis stay relevant, stay towards the top of the division. It's a great win, and I'm sure we'll see him fight another big name next.
And that brings us to the next bout on the card, which was Stephen Wonderboy Thompson defeating Vicente Luque via decision. So what's there to say about this one?
It was a brilliant performance by Stephen Thompson against a really dangerous power striker in Vicente Luque. Wonderboy is coming back from a pretty brutal knockout loss to Anthony Pettis. Pettis threw a Superman punch off the cage and caught Wonderboy kind of knocking him out cold for the first time in his career. And the way to come back from a devastating loss is to put on a performance like Wonderboy did. He just controlled the range of the fight. He controlled the striking timing. He did everything as good as he could. There's a reason that he is the probably the best striker in the division, and definitely the trickiest striker in the division, the hardest style to fight against for long periods of time. He might not have that one-shot knockout power. Some of his kicks do, but he still is the toughest puzzle to figure out if you can't get him to the ground. So it was a fantastic win for Wonderboy, and losing to Wonderboy is not a bad way to go if you're going to lose to anybody. So Vicente Luque will be back, but it was good to see Wonderboy get his redemption after that devastating loss to Pettis.
Bringing us to the co-main event. Now, if I'm not mistaken, in our last video, you were a bit high on Darren Till, and he did end up getting the win over Kelvin Gastelum here via decision. Till, of course, coming up to middleweight to get this win. Mm-hmm. So, what more is there really to say about it? I mean, how was this a pretty dominant performance all the way for Darren Till?
I would say dominant, but he definitely won the fight. It's a lot of times the fight goes to a decision. You don't know whether that person actually won or whether there was a bad judging call or whatever. But I thought Darren Till won the fight. He was obviously the bigger fighter. Just did not let Kelvin Gastelum close the distance like he normally does. He likes to kind of leap in and out real quick. He has kind of a wider stance where he's more centered as opposed to a lot of boxers who like to lean forward more and step in. He kind of hops in real quick and lands, a nice a quick jab and a cross, or steps in with a cross first and then follows with a hook. And Till just did not let Gastelum close the distance like he normally does. Gastelum could not get Till to the ground, and it was a good performance, a big win over a big name in the division. Not as dominant a performance as he would have liked. If he would have come in there and knocked out Gastelum in the first round, he would have been calling for a title shot immediately. But Till also said that coming into the fight, he was not in a good place mentally. He said that he was kind of terrified in the locker room, and was honestly sitting there thinking about what kind of injury he could fake to get out of the fight. So, with that in mind, it's interesting to see what happened, but it's a great win over a big name in the division, and it immediately sets him up for a number 1 contender fight at middleweight. This is a relatively everybody said this was a bad fight for him to take for his debut at middleweight. Gastelum, his last fight before this was a 5-round decision loss to Israel Adesanya, so the current champ, and it was a great fight, and he rocked Adesanya a few times. And so, knowing how good Gastelum is, how much better of a wrestler Gastelum is than Till, a lot of people are saying it's a bad fight, but Till was just too big for Gastelum, who also came up from welterweight to middleweight at earlier point in his career, but they did not look the same size to me. Till looked much bigger than Gastelum and just kind of controlled the fight because of that, because of his solid striking and his size.
And then, of course, we have the main event of the night, which was Jorge Masvidal going up against Nate Diaz for the BMF Belt. And what we saw in this one is that Jorge Masvidal got the result. He won by a technical knockout in round 3 due to a cut on Nate Diaz's eyebrow. So, interesting stoppage here. You have a stoppage of the fight due to a cut.
Mm-hmm.
Is that something that we really see that often in this level of competition? Or, I mean, because I know you see it a lot in boxing, right? Mm-hmm. Where the ref stops the fight because of too much blood or whatever. But
yeah, we've seen it a few times, for sure, even in some high-profile fights. A lot of times what you'll see is, like a glancing elbow just split somebody right open. But in this case, it was just that Masvidal was just boxing Diaz up, man. Masvidal has never looked better than this fight. It was an amazing performance. But Diaz, just like his brother, has a ton of scar tissue, because this is kind of how he fights and how he has always fought in his career. Is just walk forward, put pressure on guys so that they're stepping back the whole time, and when guys are stepping back, they're still throwing shots, but they're not going to be able to knock you out. They're not going to be big shots. They're not going to be well-timed shots for the most part. So if he's walking you forward, he's willing to eat those shots that you're going to throw because he knows they're not going to be crazy. So he just takes a lot of punches in a lot of his fights. And so over time, this is built up to just having a ton of scar tissue on his brow. He's got his head down, taking punches on the head, the forehead, and the eyes, and so he gets cut pretty easily. We've seen him with this same cut in the same spot a few fights. In fact, in his last fight, which was I think 72 days before this fight against Anthony Pettis, he got cut in that same spot. So that was kind of a worry coming into this fight. The scar tissue kind of like makes your skin thinner, makes it a little more vulnerable to be cut again. So that's what happened. But I will say, as disappointing an end as this is to the baddest motherfucker belt,
right, you don't want to see a belt like that change hands on a stoppage. I mean,
you want to see it change hands on a stoppage, but like a submission win or a knockout win. You don't want like a doctor's in between round stoppage or somebody throwing a towel in. Yeah. So the weird part about this belt, right, is this. It's not a title belt, so it's not like the best in the game. It's the baddest dude in the game. So it kind of comes with this like stigma where like you have to just go in there and just throw down, right? So you expected this fight to just be kind of brutal and dirty, and I mean it was. They both just went in there and just threw down, man. And Diaz just was not able to implement his game plan against Masvidal. Masvidal was just too good. He was too well rounded. He threw everything he had. He threw kicks, punches. In the first minute of the round, he landed this crazy combination that would have knocked out any other human on the planet, and Diaz just kept coming forward, man. And Masvidal was, he like I said, he was just too good, man. He mixed in takedowns. He knocked Diaz down a few times. He threw leg kicks, threw front kick, everything, man. And it was a beautiful performance by Masvidal. I just sat there and just marveled at it. I even said that night that Masvidal has never looked so good. And it's kind of a shame that this performance wasn't for, a title belt in the division, which I think he might get next, just because this is such a high-profile fight in the division, especially if Colby Covington wins the fight against Kamaru Usman, because they have a history, they used to train together, they used to be friends, and they've kind of had some animosity lately. So I think if Covington wins the belt, he's probably going to call out Masvidal. And if he doesn't call out Masvidal, Masvidal will probably call him out, which would be an interesting fight, especially after seeing this Nate Diaz fight. Watching how well Masvidal handled a guy whose main game plan is to out-cardio you and to out-pressure you and to overwhelm you into making dumb mistakes and just to beat you down piece by piece until you crumble, which is the exact same game plan that Colby Covington has. Colby Covington, granted, has a more varied striking game than Nick Diaz. He throws strikes at a higher rate than Nick Diaz. I think he holds the record for the most strikes thrown in a fight in his last fight against Robbie Lawler, at least in a 3-round fight. And I think it would be a really interesting fight, but Masvidal looked amazing, man. Every single aspect of the game, he just outdid Diaz, and Diaz had nothing for it. That being said, Diaz looked a little better coming to the end of the 3rd round, and Diaz is known for having incredible cardio, so you want to see that 4th and the 5th round. One of Diaz's main tools is his cardio, so not seeing those last 2 rounds is kind of disappointing, because if Masvidal tires out, Diaz takes over, who knows what happens. That being said, Masvidal has had 5-round fights before. You don't expect one of the most dangerous aspects about Nate Diaz is his submission game, but Masvidal has a decision win over Damian Maia at his back at multiple points in the fight. He's probably the best jiu-jitsu practitioner in the game, so you don't expect a submission. Masvidal's never been finished. You don't know what's going to happen, so chances are Masvidal would have still either won the decision or just kept going and keeping control of the fight and beating Diaz down, but you never know.
But I think this does prove that all the hype that was around Masvidal, especially after the Askren win, was actually well-deserved hype.
Oh, 100%, dude. I mean, this guy is as bad as they get, man. Like I said, he's been fighting in backyards since the Kimbo Slice days in Miami, and that dude is a monster. He has had flashes of brilliance throughout his entire career. He's had highlight reel knockouts. Like I said, he's never been finished. He's only lost to, top tier talent, and it's great to see him finally get the recognition he deserves and to string together some high profile wins, which is something he's struggled to do. He's had high profile wins, but never enough to get him to the top of a division. But I think this is that fight. I think that his next fight, if not a title fight, 100% will be a number 1 contenders fight, and he will be either he gets a title shot next or he has to win one more and he'll be in that title shot. So it's great to see Masvidal finally get the credit that he deserves for having been one of the longest tenured guys in the game and just coming up the hard way, man. He's just a true fighter's fighter, and he's about as entertaining as you could want. His personality's great. Everything about him, he's amazing.
So we'll have to see what kind of fight he gets scheduled for next. But that's going to do it for this episode. Thanks for watching, and make sure to like and subscribe. Check out our website that's in the description. We'll see you around for more of these videos.
Fuck.
I was holding all that shit.
Alex, get your ass on the camera.
Alex,
No, I was listening.